At about 9:45 on the night of July 6, 1988, something went wrong on an oil platform in the North Sea. A pump stopped. And for the people in the control room on Piper Alpha, that pump mattered, because when it stopped, liquid levels started rising. The process wasn't stable anymore, and if they couldn't get things back under control, the platform was going to have to shut down. So they did what operators are trained to do. They looked for the backup. There was another pump, Pump A. They knew Pump A had been taken out of service earlier that day, but from what they understood, the actual maintenance work hadn't really started yet. So they checked the information available to them, and from what they could see, there wasn't a clear reason they couldn't use it. So they made the logical decision. They started Pump A. And in that moment, they unknowingly pressurized a section of pipe that was missing one of its most important safety devices, because earlier that day, a pressure safety valve had been removed. And that one fact, the fact they needed most, wasn't connected to the decision in front of them. Real quick, before we begin, if you find stories like this interesting, hit the thumbs up button. It really helps the channel. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe and turn on all the notifications so you don't miss the next episode. All right, let's get into it. Piper Alpha sat 120 miles northeast of Aberdeen, Scotland. It was one of the most productive platforms in the North Sea. Originally, Piper Alpha was built for oil production, but over time it was modified to handle gas as well. And that change matters because it added more complexity, more equipment, and more ways for one failure to become something much bigger. On a platform like that, everything is connected. Pumps, compressors, pipes, valves, alarms, permits, shift handovers, and people. And that's the part that's easy to miss, because when people think about offshore disasters, they picture fire, smoke, steel collapsing into the sea. But before Piper Alpha became one of the worst offshore disasters in history, it was something much smaller. It was a maintenance job, a pressure safety valve, a pump that was supposed to stay off, and a night crew trying to solve a problem with information that looked complete, but wasn't. Earlier that day, during the day shift, maintenance work was being done on Pump A. Pump A was one of two condensate pumps. The other pump, Pump B, was running. Pump A was the standby. And as part of the work, the pressure safety valve connected to Pump A was removed for recertification. Now, a pressure safety valve is exactly what it sounds like. It's there so that if pressure gets too high, the system has a way to relieve it before something fails. So if that valve is gone, that equipment can't just be treated like it's ready to run. The open ends where the valve had been were covered with blind flanges. Basically flat metal plates bolted over the openings. That might be fine as a temporary measure while the system is isolated and everyone understands the equipment is not available, but it's not the same as having the safety valve back in place. And that distinction, temporary but not safe for operation, is where the story starts to turn. The work was controlled through the platform's permit to work system, and in theory, that system should have made Pump A's status obvious. Not just to the person doing the maintenance, not just to the supervisor on days, but to anyone who might make a decision about that pump later. Because that's what a control of work system is supposed to do. It's supposed to carry the truth of the equipment forward, across people, locations, shifts, especially when the people who start the work aren't the same people who will be dealing with the consequences. But that night, the truth about Pump A didn't travel cleanly. Shift handover sounds ordinary. It sounds like a routine conversation at the end of a long day. What's running, what's down, what needs to be watched, what maintenance is still open. But in high hazard work, a handover isn't just an update, it's a safety system, because if one crew leaves with critical knowledge in their heads and the next crew doesn't receive it clearly, then the plant doesn't care that the information technically existed, the pressure doesn't care, the hydrocarbons don't care. The next decision happens anyway, and on Piper Alpha, that's what happened. The night shift knew Pump A had been taken out of service for maintenance, but according to the incident summaries, they believed the maintenance work hadn't actually begun. And that's the detail that matters, because from their point of view, Pump A wasn't obviously dangerous. It wasn't clearly missing a critical safety valve. It was a backup pump that had been unavailable, but maybe could be brought back if they needed it. And later that night, they needed it. At around 9:45 p.m., Pump B failed. The running pump went down and couldn't be restarted. Now imagine the pressure of that moment. You're offshore, it's night, you're watching levels rise in a process system that needs to stay under control. You know there's another pump. You know that pump was taken out of service, but you also believe the work on it hasn't actually started, so the question becomes, can we use it? Can we avoid a shutdown? And this is where, after the disaster, it's easy to sit comfortably outside the moment and say, they should have known, they should have checked, they should have stopped. But that's not how the moment looked from the inside of the control room. From inside the control room, they were trying to solve an operating problem. They weren't trying to take a shortcut to disaster. They were trying to keep the platform stable with the information they had. And that's what makes the story so uncomfortable, because the decision wasn't irrational. It was logical. It was just based on an incomplete picture. What they couldn't see, at least not clearly enough to stop the decision, was that Pump A's pressure safety valve was gone. The valve had been removed. The pipe openings had been blanked. And when Pump A was brought back online, pressure found the weakest link in that setup. Gas condensate began leaking from the blind flange assembly, and then it found an ignition source. That first explosion happened in the process area, and even then, this still didn't have to become the disaster it became. And that's important, because if we stop the story here, we make Piper Alpha sound like a simple paperwork failure, a missing permit, bad handover, a pump started by mistake. That explains the beginning. It doesn't explain why 167 people died. After the first explosion, the platform's other weaknesses started showing up. The design of the platform, the fire protection, the emergency response, the connection to other platforms, the way production systems interacted, the way people were trained to evacuate, the way authority was handled in a time of crisis, all of it mattered. Piper Alpha wasn't just a platform. It was part of a network. Nearby platforms continued sending hydrocarbons through pipelines connected to Piper Alpha after the first explosion, which fed the fire and made the situation even worse. High-pressure gas lines ruptured as the disaster escalated. Fires grew, smoke spread, escape routes became unusable, helicopter evacuation became impossible, lifeboats couldn't be used safely in the conditions people were facing, and for many of the people on board, the place they'd been trained to go in an emergency couldn't protect them from what was happening outside. So workers were trapped between the procedure and the reality, between what the emergency plan expected and what the platform had become. And that's why this can't be told as one bad decision. It was one decision entering a system that had already lost too many layers of protection. Some people stayed where they'd been told to gather. Others made their own decisions. Some jumped from the platform into the North Sea, a choice that is almost impossible to imagine. At a certain point, the official escape plan no longer matched the conditions people were actually living through. And when that happens, people stop following the plan, because the plan can't carry them anymore. They improvise, they guess, they run, they wait, they jump. And afterward, we can analyze the design, the permits, the alarms, the training, the regulator, the operator, the emergency systems, and we should. That's how safety improves. But inside the moment, for the people on Piper Alpha, it was no longer an investigation, it was survival. By the end, 167 people were dead. After the disaster, Lord Cullen led a public inquiry. The inquiry ran for 180 days, and the final report examined not just what happened that night, but the deeper systems that made the disaster possible. And the report didn't come back with one lesson. It came back with 106 recommendations. All of them were accepted. Those recommendations helped transform offshore safety, including the move toward a goal-setting safety regime and the safety case approach that became central to offshore regulation. The system had information. It knew Pump A had been touched. It knew a valve had been removed. It knew work wasn't complete. It knew the equipment wasn't in its normal state. But the person making the decision didn't receive that truth in a way that stopped the action. And safety information that can't reach the decision is not control, it's history. Piper Alpha happened in 1988, so it's tempting to treat it like an old offshore story, a paper permit story, a North Sea story, a history lesson. But that's too easy, because every hazardous workplace still has some version of a Pump A machine that's almost ready, a valve that's been removed, a temporary fix everyone understands until one person who doesn't understand it has to make a decision. A permit that technically exists but isn't connected to the asset. A handover that mostly happened, a maintenance status that's clear to one crew and invisible to the next. A warning that lives in one system while the decision happens in another. And that's the real lesson. Not that people need to be more careful. That's what organizations say when they don't want to look at the system. The people on Piper Alpha didn't need a poster telling them to think twice. They needed the truth about Pump A to be impossible to miss. They needed the equipment status, the permit, the isolation, and the handover to point to the same answer. Don't start this pump. The night crew didn't wake up that day planning to take a risk. They weren't trying to be careless. They were trying to solve a problem. A pump had failed. The process needed stabilizing. Another pump appeared available, so they started it. And only afterward did the missing piece become obvious. The valve was gone. The permit existed, the maintenance existed, the hazard existed. But at the moment that mattered, those facts weren't connected. And that's the lesson Piper Alpha keeps teaching. A safety system can't just store information. It has to move information across shifts, teams, decisions, pressure. Because the question isn't whether the information exists somewhere. The question is whether it reaches the person who needs it before the decision gets made. On Piper Alpha, it didn't, and 167 people never came home. If you enjoyed this story, please take a second to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on all notifications so you don't miss future episodes. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.